Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well. As you start to embark on this journey towards becoming a BCBA and completing the coursework in applied behavior analysis, I thought it was important to take a little bit of time to go over some of the requirements that are involved to be able to sit for the exam to become a BCBA, to make sure that everyone's on the right track and is doing the things they need to do to be able to be successful. And there's a great document that's available from the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. We're going to spend a little bit of time going through that today. You can find that document if you just search BACB.com, Behavior Analyst Certification Board, BACB.com. That's going to take you right to this homepage for the BACB. And you can see right here in the middle, we've got options for RBT or Registered Behavior Technician, BCABA, which is Assistant Behavior Analyst, and BCBA, Board Certified Behavior Analyst, which is the program that you're going through right now. And we can see that down below, we've got an option for a hyperlink for the BCBA handbook. So you're going to want to go ahead and click on that to be able to take a look at the handbook that outlines all of the requirements for becoming a BCBA. And what we'll do once we get into this handbook, we can scroll right down to the table of contents right here. And you can see there's an overview about what the BACB is, what a BCBA is, all of this other stuff. But what we want to really jump into is thinking about the eligibility requirements. What do you actually need to do to be able to become a BCBA? And one thing that you'll see in this version of the handbook is we've got a whole bunch of stuff starting on page 6 about this. But then if we get to the bottom under eligibility requirements, it says BCBA 2027 eligibility requirements. That's where you want to go, because you're going to be sitting for the exam under the 2027 eligibility requirements. So everything that predates 2027 is not going to be relevant for you. So let's go right ahead and we'll hover over that hyperlink. It's going to take us right to page 25. And so here we go, and we can talk a little bit about what the eligibility requirements are for the exam. So first of all, prior to 2027, there were multiple pathways that people could go about meeting the requirements to become a BCBA. Beginning in 2027, there are only 2 pathways. There is Pathway 1 and there's Pathway 2. And the primary difference between Pathway 1 and Pathway 2 is that Pathway 1 is you're going through and getting a master's degree in a program that has been accredited by either APBA or ABAI. And in Pathway 2, you're getting a master's degree from a program that is not accredited, or it is not yet accredited, and you're completing behavior analytic coursework. At this point in time, the Fitchburg State program has not gone through the accreditation process. We're in the process of doing that, but we're not yet accredited. So as by virtue of going through this program, you are going to select Pathway 2 Behavior Analytic Coursework, okay? Which that involves a master's degree or higher, which at this point you're either coming into the program with a master's degree already, or you're going through our master's degree program. But in either case, you are also completing behavior analytic coursework, and you'll be completing practical field work in applied behavior analysis. So again, you have to choose between Pathway 1 and Pathway 2. At Fitchburg State, we are Pathway 2. So if we scroll down to Pathway 2, and you can see that they provide a little visual here. You have your degree, you have your behavior analytic coursework, and you have your supervised field work. You complete those 3 components, and that makes you eligible to submit an application to take the examination. You pass and take the exam, and then you become a BCBA. So just going over these things in a little bit more detail. As far as the degree, you have to have a master's degree or higher from a qualifying institution in any field. So at this point, if you're coming in with the master's already, the master's can be in literally absolutely anything. If you're in our master's program here, you're getting a master's in special education, specifically in the area of applied behavior analysis. Now, regardless of what your master's degree is in, you also have to complete behavior analytic coursework. Those of you that are doing your master's here, you're getting that behavior analytic coursework as part of your master's. Those of you who are coming in with the master's already, this is the sequence that you're taking to satisfy and complete the behavior analytic coursework. So you have to complete behavior analytic coursework that meets all of the requirements in the Pathway 2 section at an institution that has a Pathway 2 program contact. For your purposes, I am your Pathway 2 program contact, which means that when you're done with the whole process, I'm going to fill out a form that attests that you have completed the required coursework. So if we scroll down a little bit more, this is the coursework requirement under the 2027 requirements. A course in basic principles of behavior, a course in theory and philosophy and behavior analysis, a course in research methods, 2 courses in behavior assessment and intervention, 1 course in organizational behavior management, and 1 course in ethics in behavior analysis. What you may notice if you've looked at our plan of study, the names of our courses directly align to these content areas and descriptions. So we have these 7 standalone courses that map on directly to the content areas and descriptions that the BACB is looking for. So when you complete our 7 course sequence, either as a standalone, if you have a master's already, or embedded in our master's program, you're meeting these 2027 eligibility requirements. So in addition to the coursework, there is supervised fieldwork. You have to complete supervised fieldwork and applied behavior analysis. And you can do that in one of 2 areas, either supervised fieldwork or concentrated supervised fieldwork. And we'll get into the distinction between those 2 in a moment. So here we get down here, and there's this really convenient table that specifies what you need. So there are 2 paths, as we said. There is supervised fieldwork, and there's concentrated supervised fieldwork, okay? In the supervised fieldwork, you need to accrue 2,000 hours. In the concentrated supervised fieldwork, you need to accrue 1,500 hours. As far as who your supervisor is, in both cases, whether you're doing supervised fieldwork or concentrated supervised fieldwork, your supervisor has to be an active BCBA with no current disciplinary sanctions who has been certified for at least 1 year and has met the ongoing supervision CEU requirement, or they can be an active BCBA with no current disciplinary sanctions who's been certified for less than 1 year, but if that's the case, they have to be receiving monthly consultation from a qualified consulting supervisor. So basically, you need an active BCBA in good standing, typically who's been certified for at least 1 year, or if they haven't been certified that long, they're getting ongoing consultation. Now, how much of your supervision hours of your fieldwork hours have to be supervised each supervisory period? Well, in the case of supervised fieldwork, it has to be 5% of hours. In the case of concentrated supervised fieldwork, it has to be at least 7.5% of your hours, okay? So this is the amount of time that your supervisor is actually directly interacting with you, okay? 5% of your hours if you're doing the 2,000, 7.5% if you're doing 1,500. Now here's a question, what's a supervisory period? A supervisory period is 1 month. So 5% of your hours each month if you're doing supervised field work, 7.5% of your hours each month if you're doing concentrated supervised field work. The next piece, how many fieldwork hours per supervisory period? And there's no distinction here between supervised and concentrated. You can have a minimum of 20 hours of fieldwork per month and a maximum of 160 hours of fieldwork per month, right? So that maps on roughly, 160 hours maps on roughly to a 40-hour work week, 4 weeks per month, but a minimum of 20 hours. Okay, if you're doing less than 20 hours of field work, it's just not enough for it to be counted. The next section, observations of trainee with client per supervisory period. So this is basically of that supervision you're getting, how much of that supervision has to be your supervisor actually watching you with clients. If you're doing supervised field work, at least 60 minutes has to be directly observed. If you're doing concentrated supervised field work, at least 90 minutes has to be directly observed. Next, how much individual supervision hours per supervisory period? And the answer is, in both cases, at least 50% of your supervised hours must be individual. So what this means is that, again, for at least half of your supervision, it's got to be just you and your supervisor one-on-one, which means that half of it can be in a group setting. And that might be your supervisor with you and one other trainee. It could be up to 9 other trainees for a total of 10 people getting supervision all at the same time. And then the final piece is unrestricted activities. At least 60% of your total supervision has to be spent in unrestricted activities. And what is of note for both of these, for this last one, unrestricted activities, at least 60% of your total supervised fieldwork hours, right? That doesn't mean it has to be 60% each month. You could have some months that are all restricted. As long as 60% of the overall isn't unrestricted, you're going to be okay. And we'll get into the difference between restricted and unrestricted in a minute. All right, so what we can do now, actually, because now we're getting to applying for the BCBA examination. So let's go back up a little bit and talk about what supervision itself might look like. So we're going to jump back up a little bit to stuff that's under the old standards, just because that's where they're talking about supervision in general. Okay, so we've got supervisor qualifications. Let's go to the nature of supervision. Supervision is about improving and maintaining your repertoires, helping you develop the skill set that you need to be able to be successful. And it can be things like monitoring your skills, communicating with you, conducting training of you, modeling professional, technical, and ethical behavior, reviewing your written materials, etc. But the bottom line is the supervision is about doing things that help you be able to become a more effective and better BCBA. As far as the structure of those supervision interactions, the supervisor has to meet with you throughout your supervisory period, which again is a calendar month, to provide frequent feedback and close oversight. It can occur in either individual or group, but at least half of it has to be individual. And the supervisor has to observe you with clients that you're serving during each supervisory period. As we get into some more specifics, supervisor-trainee contact is a real-time interaction between the supervisor and trainee that takes place in an individual or group format. So again, this has to be synchronous. It doesn't have to be face-to-face. It doesn't have to be in person, but it has to take place in real time. Texts or emails or things like that don't qualify as supervisor-trainee contact. Individual supervision. Individual supervision occurs in one-to-one meetings, and at least half of your time has to be spent doing that. Group supervision, as we said, is an interactive meeting in which 2 to 10 trainees participate in the supervision activities described earlier. Can exceed 10, but this is basically any time that it's you and your supervisor and multiple trainees. Observation of the trainee with a client. At least one supervisor must observe the trainee working with a client in the natural environment during each supervisory period. An in-person on-site observation is preferred. So it is better and it's preferred by the board if your supervisor is right there with you in real time, watching you interacting with your client. However, the observation may be conducted using asynchronous or synchronous format. So if your supervisor just isn't able to be present, it's possible for you to do live video conferences where your supervisor is watching you live, interacting with the client, and then providing you with feedback. Or it could be your supervisor watching you asynchronously, video that you recorded, and then meeting with you to discuss the what they saw and provide feedback on what happened during that that observation. Next, talking about documentation of field work. There are multiple things that are involved in this. When you go to document your or to have your fieldwork experience, first of all, you're going to enter into a contract with your supervisor, and you can see here there's a link. Download our sample supervision contract for BCBA or BCABA trainees for guidance in creating your own contract. That's on, let's see what page it is, page 21. You can click on that link to download a sample contract for you and your supervisor to be able to fill out, right? So you want to enter into that contract. You want to make sure that your supervisor has met all of their requirements. Basically, they've been a BCBA for a year or more, or they're getting that ongoing supervision and consultation themselves. They don't have any sanctions, and they've completed the 8-hour supervision training. You want to document that. And then additionally, there are several things that you're going to document throughout your experience. And we see here ongoing documentation of field work. There is some flexibility that's allowed on the part of the board for documenting your field work, but the bottom line is, in terms of your independent hours, which is any time that you're doing work that your supervisor is not there, you want to document the date, the start time, end time, whether it was restricted or unrestricted, and who your supervisor was. So like literally every single day that you are completing hours that you're looking to count towards satisfying the experience requirements, you want to document that. You can do that on something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, although there are other tools that you can find online for doing it, but you want to make sure you're documenting every single day, every single session. Same thing with supervised hours. Every time you have a supervision contact, you date the start time, the end time, the date, individual or group, restricted or unrestricted, and a summary of what it was that you did. Same thing for each observation. Bottom line is documentation is going to be your friend. Every single time you collect independent hours, you get supervision, or you are observed, you're going to want to document that, okay? Every single day. Then, within a month, you're going to fill out a monthly fieldwork verification form. And we see it listed here as an MFVF, monthly fieldwork verification form, right? This is at the conclusion of every month, you and your supervisor are going to fill out and sign this form that basically say, this is the work that I did this month. It's basically going to be a summary of your of all the log entries that you had for that month. And we see there's a place that you can click to get that. And I have it right over here. This is the one you'll see right now. It's 2022 fieldwork requirements, but this will end up being updated to 2027 fieldwork requirements in 2027, and so that won't be the one that you would use. But it's going to be very similar. You can see you put your name, your BACB ID, the month and year of supervision, the type, was it supervised or concentrated supervised, the state and country where it occurred, who your supervisor's name was, what your supervisor's certification number is, and then you see down here the independent hours where your supervisor wasn't present, your supervised hours where the supervisor was present, and then you're both going to sign and date it, right? Every single month you're going to fill this out, right? And so that's going to be your monthly verification form. You do that every single month throughout your entire process. So what we've got now is every single day you're documenting on your log. Every single month you're documenting on your monthly fieldwork verification form. And then at the very end of your experience, when you've accumulated all of your hours, whether it's the 1,500 for the field work or for the concentrated field work, or the 2,000 for the field work, you're then going to fill out your final verification form. And this is going to be a summary of your whole thing, your name, your ID, the start and end date of your experience. Was it supervised, or was it concentrated, or was it mixed? How many months of each kind occurred? And here we put in how many independent hours, how many supervised hours, with a supervisor present, right? And we know that if we're doing supervised, we need this to come out to 2,000. If we're doing concentrated, we need this to come out to 1,500, right? If we're doing supervised, we know we need at least 5% supervised. If we're doing concentrated supervised, we know we need at least 7.5% supervised, right? And then we fill out all of this, the attestation that you did it, right? So bottom line is we're going to fill out a log every single day. We're going to fill out a monthly form every single month. We're going to take all of that documentation and use that to generate our one final verification form. The stuff that we did every day and the stuff that we did every month, we're going to file it away and keep it for 7 years in case we get audited. But ultimately, all we're going to submit is that one sheet of paper that's a final verification form. Okay. Now, we talked a little bit about restricted versus unrestricted. So that's worth talking about a little bit here as well. And let me see if I can find it in the table of contents here, if we have a good summary of restricted versus unrestricted. Let's look. Starting fieldwork, hours requirements, fieldwork activities. Okay, so this is worth it before we even get there, okay? Acceptable activities for the work that you're doing in general. This is just a partial list, right? But conducting assessments, designing, implementing, and monitoring skill acquisition, overseeing the implementation, training others, communicating and collaborating, et cetera, et cetera. You see, all of these things are specific to working with clients and doing things that are actually behavior analytic in nature. Okay, things that are unacceptable. And this doesn't mean that these are things that you can't or shouldn't do, but these are things that don't count as experience. Things like attending conferences or university courses, attending meetings with little or no behavior analytic content, providing interventions that are not behavior analytic, completing non-behavior analytic assessments such as diagnostics, listening to podcasts, role-playing procedures that are not client-related. And this is an interesting box here on page 17, right? Can the BACB tell me if an activity counts towards my fieldwork hours? And basically they're saying no. They can give you some general frameworks for what should count and what shouldn't count, but there's so many possibilities out there, they really leave it up to you and your supervisor to make an ethical determination about what counts and what shouldn't count. Okay, so that's just what counts and shouldn't count in general. But now let's get into, if we've determined something does count, does it count as restricted activity or unrestricted activity? And again, just as a reminder, the BACB says that throughout your entire experience, at least 60% of it has to be unrestricted. Now, quick note, that doesn't mean that only 60% of it can be unrestricted. 100% of it could be unrestricted if you wanted it to be, and if that's what makes sense, but at least 60% of it has to be unrestricted, okay? And they say here, unrestricted activities are those that are most likely to be performed by a BCBA. Examples include observation and data collection, training staff and caregivers, conducting assessments, meeting with clients, conducting assessments, graphing and analyzing data, researching literature relative to a client's current programming, or writing and revising behavior analytic programs. A shorthand is, if this is something that you would expect a BCBA to be doing as part of their job, it's probably an unrestricted activity, okay? Now, that being said, if those are unrestricted, what are restricted activities? Restricted activities are typically those things that someone might do that you wouldn't expect a BCBA to be doing. And it's often characterized as delivering therapeutic and instructional procedures. One way of thinking about this is restricted activities are typically things that you would expect a behavior technician to do. Okay, so working directly one-on-one with the client, implementing procedures that somebody else has developed. Those are things that are typically going to be considered restricted activities. And the BACB made this distinction because they don't want people acquiring all of their hours essentially doing things that a behavior technician would do and never getting exposure to doing things that you would expect a BCBA to do. So again, up to 40% of your time can be spent in restricted activities, but none of it has to be. 100% could be unrestricted, but at least 60% has to be unrestricted. No more than 40% can be restricted. And that's our distinction between those two. Okay, so that basically outlines both the course requirements as well as the supervision requirements that you need to satisfy throughout your course of study to be eligible to sit for the exam to become a BCBA. One final thing that I think is worthwhile is this fieldwork checklist and tip sheet. So before you start your fieldwork, things that you should do to make sure that you are heading in the right direction and the hours that you're accruing are going to count so you don't get any nasty surprises at the end of the process, right? So this checklist here, you put your name, you're all going to be pursuing BCBA certification, right? So we'll check that. And then a list of things to do. Before starting your field work, create a BACB portal account. Be sure to use an email address that is not likely to change. And then put your BACB ID here, right? And we can do that. We go to BACB.com and we should be able to go to My Account and then don't have an account, sign up now, right? And you should be able to create an account right here. It's really important that you do that before you start the process because you've got to put your BACB ID on all of these forms. You got to put it on your contract. So you want to make sure that you have this BACB ID before you start collecting hours. Read and make sure you understand the applicable fieldwork requirements. So we just did a really high level review of this document over here, but I showed you how to find it. Go get it. Download it, spend some time reviewing it so you know what's what. Reach out to me if you have any questions. You need to start your qualifying coursework before you can begin accruing hours. And guess what? All of you, because you are watching this, you're enrolled in SPED 8013. So you have started qualifying coursework. So you have satisfied this. So put the start date of SPED 8013 here. Acquire an appropriate supervisor. So you need to find someone who can serve as your supervisor. Let's talk about that a little bit, okay? How do you go about finding an appropriate supervisor? Your best bet is where you are working now, assuming that you are doing work that is behavior analytic in nature, is to find a BCBA at your current place of employment that is willing and able to supervise you. That's your best bet for a number of reasons. Number one, because in most cases, you're going to be able to take the paid work that you're doing right now in the field of applied behavior analysis and use that as your experience, right? So it's good to be able to get paid for the work that you're doing. And if you've got a supervisor right there where you're working, that person's already in your organization. It's going to be much easier for them to provide that supervision for you. It's just a much more seamless process. The other thing is that very often that person is going to be doing that at no charge to you. It's going to be being done through the place where you're working. So it's the biggest win-win possible. Now, that being said, what if you don't have someone where you're working that is able or willing to provide supervision for you? You have a couple of choices there. And one choice is honestly to find somewhere to work where there is someone, right? To find an organization that will provide that supervision for you as part of the work that you're doing. Obviously, there's some pain there because it may involve changing jobs. But it will put you in a situation where you have someone who could supervise you. Let's say you're not interested in that. That's just not a viable alternative for you. At that point, your alternative is to go to the BACB certificate registry, and there is a link here, and find someone who is willing to come in and supervise you. Now that certainly can be done, but a couple of things that are involved with that. Number one, you're going to pay for it, right? So no one you find on the BACB certificate registry is going to supervise you for free. So you're going to end up paying for it. It's not going to be particularly inexpensive. That's why it's not the greatest option unless it's kind of a last resort. The other reason why it can be kind of problematic is now you have someone external that you've got to figure out the logistics of bringing into your organization. So you're going to have to work with your organization about how that's going to work. So it can be done, but I wouldn't recommend it as your first option. Your first option should be finding someone where you're currently working who is able and willing to provide that supervision for you. But bottom line is, no matter how you do it, you've got to find a supervisor before you can start accruing hours. Once you've done that, you found a supervisor, you're going to complete the supervision contract with your supervisor. If you have multiple supervisors, you may have a place where you're working where there are going to be lots of different BCBAs supervising you, and there's a separate contract you'll enter into for that and a separate form that you'll fill out for that. That's okay too. But bottom line is you want a contract. And then you want to have your system for storing your fieldwork related documents, right? Where am I keeping my contract? How am I documenting my hours every single day? How am I documenting and where am I keeping my monthly forms, right? Make sure you have a good system for how that's going to happen, right? And then plan out your field work. We don't have to worry about the BCABA stuff here. We're going to worry about the BCBA, right? If you're doing supervised field work, well, regardless of whether you're doing supervised or concentrated, the longest time frame it can take is 5 years. You got to finish it within 5 years. But the shortest possible, if you're doing supervised and you max out at 160 per month, you could do it in basically 13 months. If you're doing concentrated and you're maxing out at 160, you can do it in 10 months. Okay? So figure out how long am I going to do it? How many hours am I going to accrue each month? And there's a little table here that you can use to chart out what it's going to look like. Okay, my game plan is to get 160 each month. Whoops, I only did 16 that month. That's not going to work because we know we need a minimum of 20. But my game plan right now is to do 160. But maybe you know that when I come to, because I'm in a school, and when I come to July and August are going to be really tough. I'm going to be helping out with the summer program, but I'm maybe only going to get 80 each of those months, right? And you just basically fill it out to figure out where you're going to find yourself being. And then during your field work, keep your personal contact info up to date, remain current on changes to certification, et cetera, right? Just all the different things that you want to make sure that you do. So this is a great document to be able to access to make sure you're meeting all the requirements. And then there's also a really useful document down at the bottom of this, the Appendix A, that gives a sample of different kinds of field work and lets you know, okay, is this restricted, independent, restricted group, restricted observation, restricted individual? And same thing for unrestricted. Is it independent, group, observation, individual? Just a handy cheat sheet. It is not exhaustive, right? There are other things, but this gives you a general feel for a whole bunch of different things that you might be doing. And is it restricted or unrestricted, first of all? And then what category of unrestricted or restricted does it fall under? So that can be a really helpful tool as you go to sort out if the work you're doing is restricted or unrestricted. So I'm going to include this form as well as the current BCBA handbook. There'll be links to these with this lecture, but this just gives you an overview of what the expectations are as you move forward towards meeting the requirements to sit for the exam to become a BCBA. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you soon.